we have a very specific 4-step knowledge transfer process that I'd like to share with you. But before I do that, I thought I could actually take a minute to go around the room and say, we've got about an hour here. What would you like to talk about? What is your first thought that comes to mind over the next hour? Knowledge management, innovation, everything you've been talking about so far. What is the question that's going through your mind at this point? I want to write all those down. I'm going to try and tie them into the knowledge transfer process. But I'm thinking let's use that hour for the best use of your time here. So, as I give you a second to think there, can I call on my new friend Nicola? What comes to mind first for you?
So I suppose one of the using your process actually, I've done parts of it, but then what kind of method should I use to share this knowledge? Like, how do I pick the most appropriate method for the situation, for the context, for the people, that kind of thing? Is that a reasonable thing to throw at you?
Perfect, yes. Got it, thank you. What would be a good use of time for the next hour for you?
For me, I think my main question is about harnessing knowledge.
Okay.
Relevant knowledge, obviously, to the processes and the needs of the organization.
Harness relevant knowledge. Okay, thank you. Wow, so a lot there. So successful transition, motivation, and there was one in the middle. Successful and motivated. Successful transition and motivated. Okay, thank you.
I guess for me it would be if you could share any tips for moving from a knowledge management systems approach to a business-oriented, people-oriented approach. I mean, I know the theory, so I'm looking for practical ways of making the transition.
Extra excited about that one, thank you.
Creating a knowledge sharing culture within the agency.
Perfect. I heard the word agency there, so that helps too. Thank you.
Well, this is quite similar to what Elena said. Some practical tips on the application of this knowledge age into a corporation. Behind talking about squirrels and wolves.
The action you take. Okay, perfect, thank you.
Hi, and maybe something about exciting people about knowledge sharing.
Would you call that motivation again or different?
Motivation, communication, how do we get people, engaged in doing it, enthusiastic about doing it?
Perfect. All right. Great one, thank you.
Right, for me, I'm interested in measurement. I want to show the return on investment and performance measures so that I can use that to sell the ideas.
If I put return on investment, is that?
Yes, it's measurement. How do I show them how this is working and what the benefits are?
All right, so don't let me forget, because I often do. It's 4 steps in the process today, which so far I think is going to be a decent fit. We've debated adding a 5th step specifically around measurement, so don't let me forget that one, because sometimes I do. Thank you.
I'm a huge advocate and believer in storytelling, so I'd love you to tell us a personal, juicy success story, start to finish, involving like a real old guy and what you got out of old lady, what you got out of them and how that played out for everybody.
Perfect, okay. I can do that. Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to tie that, and the reason I drew the arrow is I'm going to tie that to when we talk about measurement and return on investment, the anecdotal narrative story tends to be the most impactful, but we'll get there. Okay, thank you.
I'm similar. I want to take back and get engagement and excitement about how we do.
So motivation, excited to get, and you're looking for how to get others excited about it.
Yes, yeah, how to convince others to.
Convince. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm thinking about how to influence people at higher levels in the organisation of the importance of knowledge management.
Oh. the broader knowledge management as opposed to a specific approach? Or both? All right, so I'll do KT process and KM. That's a bigger one, which is great. And
I think it's already very complete, and I would be, for me, it's again this practical application as well, as it was, yes.
Practical application and story. Okay. Now that you've heard everyone else, has anything else popped up for you? Anything we've missed on this list? So it's funny. Sometimes I start with a broad knowledge management view, and other times I go straight into the knowledge transfer process. So maybe, because it came up, maybe I will start with just a personal, and it is a bit of a story in a way too, a John Hovell view, one person's view of knowledge management as a whole. So we've had lots of workshops, you're in a great session here, lots of different ways to define knowledge management as we know. The one that I personally put on it is optimizing the flow of knowledge. That's the one I stick out there. There's no great silver bullet. Even we have great debates about whether that's even a good definition or a good way to look at it or not, but that's where I tend to come from. So on that side, you've got the book out there called The 96 Approaches of Knowledge Management. I tend to go there first when I'm talking about what is knowledge management. Those 96 approaches are a very tactical, specific way to go and do something. It's a very action-oriented side. That then brings me to the pyramid, the triangle I visualize in my head of people, process, technology. And I think the KMS, Knowledge Management System, came up, so that'll tie in these two a little bit. I find, and I'm going to make a big assumption that you've also heard quite a bit of the technology talk, quite a bit of the tools side of knowledge management, which is very powerful, but it's just one leg of the three, and I think that might even be a visual that you tend to use. But the culture, the people, the human dynamic side of knowledge management, enabled by process, enabled by technology, it's the full three. You can't just have one, you can't ignore the other two. The three together is the big KM for me. So if that in 2 seconds gives an overview, the intent of today was to come in and share this 4-step knowledge transfer process. It's one that we've used at several defense-based organizations. It's now spinning out into other industries as well. I think it'll hit each one of these, but let's come back and make sure that it really does. In terms of how I want to look at this next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to aim to just talk for 10 or 15. I'm going to aim for 10, which means it'll go 15. So I'll go as quick as I can. After that, at your table, or maybe we'll just do half and half, discuss, so be thinking as I go through these 4 steps, why this would work in your organization or those that you work with, your stakeholders, or maybe even better, why it wouldn't work. What are some barriers that you personally would bring to this not working, or you think your organization would present for this not working? So that'll be the group discussion at your table. Then I do want to take a little bit of a risk here. I'll move this flip chart, and as we talked about, I think if we all pick up our chairs, come to the front of the room and sit in a circle without tables blocking us, I think we might be able to get into a pretty deep 15, 20-minute conversation at the end to really put into the room your real barriers. If you were to try and take this back to your organization today, why would it work? Why wouldn't it work? Let's get that in this room where it's a very safe space to discuss it and make it applicable for you. So, 4 steps of the knowledge transfer process. 1, 2, 3, 4. They are somewhat linear, just to make them easy to memorize, but you can do them a little bit out of order. I just draw them this way so that it's easier to get your mind wrapped around and frankly see. The first time I heard this process, I thought, wow, isn't that just how we do things anyway? But actually you find when you get into practice, it's not how things are done on an average daily basis. So the first step is to create a knowledge transfer team. It is a team-based, closed system approach. So each one of those words is fully loaded with things. we create a team, on average 5 to 8 people, and each person has a role. So I draw 1, 2, 2 up here because the 3 roles that we talk about are expert, or what we often will call incumbent. Then there's another role which is professional. And then there's next expert, which sometimes they'll call nexpert to make up a word. We often aim to have 1 incumbent, 1 person that is already in a role, 2 people that are ready to take on that role right now, and 2 people that are 1 job away or 2 jobs away from being ready to take on that role. Now, let me take a little bit of a step back to the storytelling. The reason this is a team-based approach is because this work came from a government contract in the United States. So, the NASA organization, which I'm assuming you're mostly familiar with or have heard of, put out a request saying, we've lost the knowledge, we've lost the ability to get to the moon, and that's unacceptable. We can't not have that knowledge, we can't have that ability. So we've created a role called Chief Knowledge Officer. That role will ensure that we never lose that knowledge, that capability to get to the moon. They put out a contract, defense contractors and people responded to that. It happened to be that Lockheed Martin won that contract, did amazing work. They designed this 4-step process. They then brought in external universities and non-defense partners to look at this process and then say, can you validate for us that it is effective? How effective is it? So it gets to that measurement side. I'll put some numbers to each one of these steps, but that gives you a little bit of the story behind why this was created. The team reason is because I've already heard a couple of you say at lunch, there's an age demographic that the world faces. Not every organization faces the same way, but there just were a certain number of births everywhere in the world, mostly related to the world wars that went on. So you've probably seen the curve, but it looks basically like that, where you've got Gen Y, Gen X, and baby boomers. So there's many more baby boomers than there are Gen X, and there's a few more Gen Y than there are Gen X. So if you have your HR data in your organization, your age chart probably looks somewhat similar to that, depending on what you do and who you do it for. But the companies I've worked for, the curve basically looks like that. If you think about your standard backfill approach, you usually would get 2 people in a room and say this person's retiring or this person's leaving or being promoted or whatever's, or being sold off, made redundant, whatever's happening. You'd get 2 people in a room and say, can't lose that knowledge of that person. You 2 share and talk, and there you go. You've now shared it. Somebody else now knows how to do that. It was left up to chance, and this age curve basically proved that that knowledge was just going to walk out the door a few years later anyway because of the numbers. So the team-based approach says we're getting more people involved, and it's more collaborative, and it comes from this is not a one-way transfer. This is by definition a 2-way. We will co-create and figure out together how to do this role or what the knowledge is around this process or this expert or whatever's happening there. So you create a team with these roles. Some companies will use a facilitator, others will not. We currently use trained facilitators to run the knowledge transfer sessions. On average, it's 1 hour per week for 12 weeks. That's the average. It's been much faster than that, and it's been much longer than that. But that gives you a general feel of about how long this takes to run. The facilitator would be people like you in this room. It's someone that understands explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge, and yet never uses those words. You get into a room, you get people to talk about how they do something where they don't even realize how they do it. That's what the facilitator training and expertise is in, getting this group to talk about things they don't even realize they know how to do. Step 2 is to create a knowledge transfer plan. It's nothing more than an Excel document, or at least the way we typically do it. It's an Excel document. You'd think, okay, so another story, another example for you. One of the things that BAE does is build submarines. We were losing one of our greatest submarine naval architect, engineer, design type skill set. It was leaving the business within 2 years, and it was the greatest skill that that business needed to have. We created a knowledge transfer team around that role, around that person. They ran it for about 18 months, and unfortunately that person passed away 6 months after the team ended. So the knowledge, the tacit side, was truly gone in that sense. That customer has come back and said there has not been a hiccup in that program, the way it's been designed and run, almost directly related to that knowledge transfer team and how that effort played out. What the team did first, and what all of our teams do first, is create a knowledge transfer plan. You might say with a naval architect, they do that work for 30, 40, 50 years in one role, getting extremely good at it. How could you possibly learn overnight or in 12 weeks, 12 hours, what they did for 30, 40, 50 years? It's usually about 30 questions. This goes back to one of your earlier points about getting people excited and motivated. This is not the naval architect coming into the room and saying, here's everything you ever needed to know. It's quite the opposite. The naval architect comes in and says, what would you like to know? What do you need to know? What's already in your head and not already in your head? Let's talk about that. The facilitator gets them to come up with, the team, the most difficult questions to have the best conversations in that room with those people. Like I say, it's about 30 questions they come up with. We have an Excel template. We can share that with you. It's got 5 or 6 other columns to it, like the category it belongs to. How can we practice this question? There's some other columns in there. But for the most part, it's very deep, tacit questions for the entire team to then have conversations about, which is step 3. Codify and have conversation. These are your 12 one-hour meetings, give or take. So you've got your 30 questions, then that's your first meeting or 2. Your second or third meeting, you start going back through line by line each one of the questions that the team came up with. So if it's a naval architect, a question from a professional might be something to the effect of, I've never been a naval architect before. What does a naval architect do? That could be one type of question. Another one would be, what got you into being a naval architect? You've been doing this a long time. You must be, what keeps you interested in this role? You're looking to get deeper and deeper and deeper into what is the skill set, what is the deep knowledge they have in that role. In step 3, you'll actually have those conversations and you'll document along the way. We don't necessarily give any template for that documentation. Some teams use Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, Excel, mind maps, dialogue maps, blogs, wikis. It's up to the team to determine the best way for them to document how those conversations went. The very last step is probably the most impactful step, application of knowledge. The very last column in the Excel document in the knowledge transfer plan, so you've got those lists of questions, the last column is called application. The facilitator ensures that every single question has a physical way to apply that question, to actually practice it. These first 3 steps, you've got people in a room or virtually, depending on where people are located, talking and learning that way. The 4th step is to now actually stand up and go do something. So in the naval architect example, you might say, well, part of that is doing your blueprint design for minimizing the number of holes that we're going to drill into the material for the submarine. How did you do that? Well, you can actually create an e-learning, you can create a hands-on practice, you can actually go out to the submarine and look at blueprints, do something very physical where people are making real life changes and getting feedback in real time from the rest of the team. So now you can begin to see in that fourth step where the really deep learning happens. Not only have you talked about it and learned about it and asked some really tough questions, you're now physically hands-on practicing whatever that role is. And from people that are also learning it, getting feedback. So the whole team is learning at the same time. Time-wise, that's about where I want to stop. I'm trying to remember what's on the chart before this, but I've already forgotten. I may flip back. Let me pause there and just take group level questions first for a few minutes. What would you like me to add to the 4 steps?
Sorry, I'm a bit confused. Are you going to go back over those checklist things?
I sure could. Yep. Did I answer yours on here?
I'm going to push it a little further.
Yep.
In terms of your role in that process, where did you fit in?
I'm often a facilitator,
Okay.
but not always. My particular role today is in organization development. So organization development is related but different to knowledge management. So I do more group consultation, process consultation, making sure the organization is fit for purpose. This is one of many knowledge management approaches that we use in that process. So I'm often facilitating or designing or working with executives and individual contributors to make sure that the individual and the group is fit for purpose, headed in a direction, and getting there as quickly as they can. When they come and say, we've got an age demographic challenge, that is our #1 challenge, what should we do about that? That's when I'll come in and say, let's talk about the knowledge transfer process. Would this be a good fit for you? So sometimes it's a sales pitch. Sometimes it's then, well, that all sounded good, but I didn't catch all of that. Can you just come run those meetings for me? Sure. So then it becomes a facilitation type role. There's also a part of this role where it's training. It then is people that don't even realize, or it's not a priority yet to focus on, you know, redundancies or age demographic or anything related to this knowledge transfer. This can almost become a daily operation, how we all work every day. That is then more of a training role that I would have to say, here's a dozen new facilitators or 2 or 3 dozen new facilitators that can help run this process for their company or their part of the business.
Yeah, because I think we had the previous speaker talk about this whole concept of continuous learning organizations as opposed to point specific, which also I think was her argument, which was very attractive, about justifying the role of the knowledge manager, the person who keeps the fires burning all the time, keeper of the flame, if you will, continuous learning. And so then there's knowledge transfer all the time, irrespective of your age and so on.
I would absolutely agree. I would definitely agree. I would even say, one thing I did forget that you sparked for me now is, we call it the secret sauce. I think we use that phrase in lots of different ways, but there's lots of things that go on as part of this process actually running. One of the bits of the secret sauce is informing the knowledge transfer team and then moving to the knowledge transfer plan. So after you get the 5, 10, it's been as many as 32 people on one team before. So again, we ran multiple times when the CEO was retiring, multiple knowledge transfer teams at the same time because there were just too many people interested in that role to do single small teams. In that first knowledge transfer plan meeting, when you're coming up with the list of questions, we very politely don't invite the expert or the incumbent. They're not invited to the first meeting because we want it to be exciting and we want it to be emergent, that the team is talking about what they want to learn, as opposed to what we found in reality is that the incumbent would come into the room and say, here's the 25 questions you need answered. If you're good at these 25 things or these 100 things, then there you go. You are ready to be this next person. We found in reality it works much better if the rest of the group comes up with a list of questions first, and then the incumbent gives feedback on that list. Add this one, let's merge these two together. It becomes that kind of emergent practice.
So the incumbent is the person with that knowledge that we're trying to get out?
It's often role-based. That's in reality, because On one hand, we're looking to solve a very specific business problem. There's a bottleneck over here, or this person is retiring. That's the reality. It usually comes to us as that kind of, please come help us with this, as opposed to us going out and saying, knowledge management's really effective, really valuable, you should be doing it. It is almost more of a reactive mode to, here's where we think we can provide value to this very specific problem you have. I'm not sure it's always in the right balance, but that's our reality.